Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. We're continuing in our exploration of the 12 signs and wonders in Egypt, traditionally called the 10 plagues. And today we'll be diving into the story of the frogs that come up out of the Nile and come into the homes of the Egyptians. It's worth noting from the outset that frogs are not dangerous. They don't carry disease, they don't bite, they don't stink. Like, there's nothing about frogs that makes them a particular threat. But if you found one in your bed, it would not be very fun. I actually did find a frog in my bed once, and it was not a great experience. My pet frog had escaped, and we never could find it. And years later, when my parents found it underneath the washing machine, dead, and the stiff skin of a frog stretched over its skeleton, my brother thought it would be so funny to leave it for me on my pillow. So John, I just want to say, ew, I can't believe you did that. So when God is giving these signs to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians, he begins with signs that do not cause them harm, but just get their attention. And this, I think, points to the grace of God. He's not striking them right away with human death. First, it's water to blood. Well, first it's staff into snake, then water to blood, then frogs invading their homes. So it's a nuisance. It's even comical, but it's not dangerous. Frogs do bring ritual uncleanness, so this is probably significant. Later in the book of Leviticus 11, verse 12 and 29 to 35 talk about the carcasses of frogs being defiling, and frogs being defiling if they're in your ovens, which we read exactly. This is where they go. They go to the ovens of the Egyptians. They would have cooked in outdoor clay ovens with coals and a fire underneath, and they would put their bread inside the oven and stick it to the roof inside this oven. And so frogs getting in there would not be good for their food preparation. Notice that the impact of these signs and wonders gradually increases. So the water to blood happens just in the Nile, but now the frogs are coming up out of the Nile and invading their homes. And in the sign of water to blood, Pharaoh turns his back and heads on into his palace, refusing to give it another thought. And so this sign follows him into the palace. The frogs are now coming into the palace, into Pharaoh's domain. It says they come into the homes. It says they come into the beds, the bedrooms, and into the beds. And in ancient Egypt, it would be only the wealthy who would have had beds. So this sign is particularly targeting the wealthy by coming into their beds. It comes into their ovens, their outdoor ovens, as I already mentioned, and Leviticus 11:35 specifically mentions that these ovens could be defiled by a dead carcass. But it also says they come into their kneading bowls. So it's even in their dishes. And a kneading bowl was the place where they kneaded the dough to make bread. And in ancient Egypt, the way they leavened their bread, it was a kind of sourdough. So they would make bread, but each time they made bread, they would take off some of the dough and leave it in the kneading bowl to leaven their next loaf. So there would always be some dough left over, and they would bake the rest and eat it. And then that leftover dough would be kneaded into the new dough so that it could rise. And so when the frogs are getting into their kneading bowls, it's not just, okay, gross, we have to wash that now, but it's actually contaminating their future food source. So again, it's a nuisance, not dangerous, not critically dangerous, but a nuisance and kind of gross. There's so much irony in this little account. There's irony historically and literarily, and so we'll look at both of those. First of all, historical irony. Frogs were considered sacred in ancient Egypt. The goddess Heket was the goddess of fertility, and she was pictured as having a frog's head. And so for that reason, some scholars suggest that the Egyptians were not allowed to kill frogs. So they would have been rendered powerless against this invasion of frogs. That particular insight comes from the Africa Bible Commentary, the section on Exodus, written by a scholar whose last name I don't know how to pronounce, but it's something like Ndjerareou. So I'll put it here on the screen so that you can see how it's spelled. A really wonderful insight. Another historical irony is that here the magicians, we're told, are able to replicate the sign. As with the water into blood, they can make it happen too. The irony is that they can't reverse it. So nobody needed more frogs at this point. The magicians are making the problem worse by making more frogs. And they're continuing to be powerless in the face of this frog invasion. Just as with the water to blood, it would have been much more useful if they could have used their powers to eliminate frogs, but they could not. So it reinforces God's judgment on Egypt. And then there are some literary echoes that are ironic. In chapter 1, when the proliferation of the Hebrews was being described, it says that the land teemed or swarmed with them, and that the Egyptians were afraid that the Hebrews would come up from the land and attack them. And now this particular sign describes the frogs as swarming or teeming and coming up from the Nile onto the land. So it's a comical reinterpretation of the Egyptian fears of the multiplication and invasion of the Hebrews, being mirrored now by the invasion of frogs. Notice that this sign, just like the last one, is done by Aaron and Moses' staff, the same staff that turned into a snake and swallowed up the Egyptians. So Pharaoh's going to keep being reminded over and over again of Yahweh's superior power, his royal authority over Pharaoh, because this staff keeps reappearing. All right, lots more to say about this sign, but we'll save it for next week. I hope you have a great week. If these videos have been helpful to you in engaging with Scripture, I love hearing your comments and questions below. I'd love for you to share these with your friends. We have a growing community of total nerds who are digging into Scripture together. So glad to be in such good company with all of you. Thanks for watching and have a great week.